I'm really excited today to be interviewing John Beaudoin, who I believe has been doing some of the most important but underreported data analysis work on both fraud with respect to COVID death reporting and also on vaccine safety. And you're writing a book about this, which I think is soon to be published, yeah?
I hope to get it out by September.
Okay, so
in September, I should say. I've pushed it another month because I didn't understand how long it takes to publish.
yeah, okay. So just some quick background about those who don't know about John. So he's an engineer by training and also has a lot of legal knowledge now. And indeed, during the COVID lockdowns, you enrolled in law school, I guess, as a mature student, only to then get unenrolled because you refused the vaccine. That's correct? Yeah.
You got it all right. That's
Okay. So
absolutely.
I first met John virtually. I guess it was about a year ago on one of these Zoom calls, and I was astonished to hear how you'd got hold of basically all of the death certificates for like Massachusetts over quite a long period, and you not only discovered a lot of fraud, but also a whole bunch of very serious safety signals relating to the COVID vaccines. But before I ask you about that, I've got some questions about that. I know that your original concerns about the kind of like the whole COVID narrative were peaked when you discovered a problem with the data about COVID deaths on the CDC website. And when you questioned it, they simply replaced the data with a new set. So can you tell us about that? And what was it that you actually found wrong with that data originally?
Sure. I wanted to prove my son wrong. He said it's all BS. So I really thought he might be right, but I wanted to be a good dad and say, hey, you got to be a good citizen. Let me go get this data because he's not going to believe anything else. And when I loaded the CDC 2014 through 2018 file, I compared that with back then it was the 2019, 2020 file. Now they've changed the aggregation of years in the files, but back then that's what it was. So I looked at the pneumonia, influenza, and then the pneumonia and influenza. So 3 different columns, one, the other, then both. And then the total deaths. The numbers weren't coming out. I call it a checksum or a parity. I'm an engineer, so I'm thinking of parity bits and checksum bits. Basically, it's just adding and subtracting. So I did that on the cells, and there were cells that didn't work out. And then they had cells that they said, we can't tell you this because of privacy. Like, these are just aggregated numbers from a population of 330 million people. Why can't you tell me this little cell? It's crazy. So I wrote to the keeper of the record of that specific file, whose email address was right online. You can look this up on CDC. And I wrote to him and I said, there's a problem with your math in the pneumonia influenza thing in this 2014 through 18 file. And no email came back. The file went down. And when it came back, the numbers were changed. It was about 36 hours, I say. It's a day and a half. I checked it every couple of hours when I was awake and figuring it's got to come back. They can't just remove the file. So when they put it back, it's not the method of calculation that changed. It was the numbers. So they actually changed the cell data. And I thought to myself, if they're getting these fed to them from all the states, they couldn't have gone back, figured out where the error was, gone back to all the states. There's no way. So what they did was they just changed the data, and it made the 2020 data. And back then, I mean, we're talking like April of 2020. So we're only weeks within COVID, right? So the 2020 numbers that were coming in were driven by New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. So people are looking at the US. They think they're looking at this 3,000 mile wide nation. They're really looking at 3 states up in the Northeast that were driving the fear of this pandemic. And the numbers made it look bad. So I realized then that's it. Sorry for the long answer, but that's what happened.
Okay, so when you say that they made the numbers look bad, I'm not quite sure what you mean, that they were worried that there were too many deaths or there were too few. I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, I know. Because it's by memory and I didn't download the files and I used a lot of stuff online. I didn't save my files. I can't reproduce exactly what happened in my mind. All I know is when I say they made it look bad, okay, well, it looked bad based on the change that they made, or excuse me, the original numbers they had made the 2020 numbers exacerbated,
Right.
like, because I'm comparing to baseline, right? And if something in baseline changes, oh, and back then the 2020 columns were, they added a column for COVID, and it was pneumonia, influenza, COVID, and then it was pneumonia and influenza, COVID and influenza, and then COVID and pneumonia, and then all three. So there were, it turns into a permutation of 6, right?
Right.
Instead of 3. Yeah. So they just didn't work out. That's all I remember. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
That,
okay. So going back to the other days that you got, how did you get hold of all those death certificates?
I would like to think it's serendipity, but it was just brute force. I filled out, it was 8 public records requests. In Massachusetts, that's the state law. It's called public records request. Your audience might be familiar with the term FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. That's at the federal level. Some states use that same language, but I did 8 public records requests, and then I spread them around among 8 different people and had them submit them. And there were different things. One of them, I asked for the specific immunization record and death certificate of one person, a 7-year-old girl who had died. They denied that, and they denied. I asked about Girish Navani. Girish Navani was president and CEO of eClinical Works. Under the False Claims Act, the federal government fined him. I can't remember the year. It was in the 20 teens, maybe, $155 million for false claims, basically fraud. He's the guy that Governor Baker in Massachusetts put on the reopening advisory board. And when I went to LinkedIn, his information was scrubbed. I went to his website for his company. It was scrubbed. Oh. I found a back door that I could get in. And I'm not a hacker by any means. All I did was write a bunch of /home/something/something, figuring that if I can't get in the front, maybe they left one of those other things hanging out there, and they did. And I went in and it was all pulled apart. It was being disassembled. He's the guy that they put on the reopening advisory board to decide whether or not we're going to reopen the economy of Massachusetts. And he runs a company that is involved in telemedicine. Telemedicine was doing very poorly before COVID. And then during COVID, he's making millions of dollars. Why would he ever open the economy? Why is he on the reopening advisory board? Why are all his information scrubbed? Why did he have to pay $155 million for fraud? So but they didn't. You know what they said when I submitted that public records request and asked for his resume or his curriculum vitae, CV, as you guys say? We don't have any information on him.
Wow.
So the only one that they gave back to me was the request for all the death certificates in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Back then it was 420,000 back to 2015. The first names, middle names, last names, parents' names, where they're from, the medical examiner's office address, license number, every cause of death, 315 different columns for a single person times 420,000.
So it had all the names. What about, did it have their vaccination status on it?
No, that's
the other thing. That's the big thing about, again,
that's the holy grail.
That is it, linking the vaccination. Well, we're going to get onto that because I've got a few questions to ask you about that, because I know that, of course, if you had that matched data, then we would be able to definitively answer all the questions. And of course, we know how hard it is to get that, and we know how damn awkward they're being, and how basically how fraudulent actually in the UK they're also being about that data. But that's another issue. Okay, so before I get on then to some questions about, which I hope are going to sort of touch on some new issues, you've done a lot of podcasts. I mean, it's a shame that not enough people, not enough normies out there are seeing and hearing what you're saying. But hopefully, I can today I can push this out and get it to a few new people that haven't seen it yet. But before we come on to some sort of new stuff, can you just maybe summarize the key findings to date that you've come to about the vaccine safety signals, from your kind of data analysis, and also maybe expand on the tweet you just put out earlier, I saw about why it's wrong to focus only on myocarditis as an adverse reaction, and also why we need to focus also on lipid nanoparticles rather than just on the spike protein.
Sure. Okay, let me start by summarizing the entire thing. And this is 15 months old. So 15 months ago, when I started looking at data, I did all cause because they can't kill a bunch of people. They can't fool us on that one. Well, it turns out I was wrong. They actually did kill a lot of people and generated a lot of fear and panic of a pandemic, when actually they were neglecting old people and kind of pushed them forward in their window of life to die 6 months earlier than normally would. So what did I find? The three basic things, I call it the symptom spectrum profile. That is the profile of the symptoms from which people die in aggregate in a society. And so you say, take a look at Massachusetts. What were they dying from, and what changes at the margins? So you'll understand second derivative, right? So there's cumulative deaths. The first derivative is daily deaths, and then the derivative of that is the changes of that over time. And what happened if you look at 2015 through 2019 as a baseline, so I got 5 years worth of baseline, right? And we're in a northern seasonal climate. I'll get to seasonality in a minute. But there's a sine wave in that. But the sine wave, it's only, okay, I got to put aside seasonality. I'm talking symptoms. Very simply, in 2020, there were a lot of excess deaths, but mostly respiratory associated, okay? So you have respiratory deaths are way up. They're called J codes. The codes start with J. J18.9 is pneumonia unspecified. That's the biggest category they like to use for that. So they don't have to look at whether it was bacterial, viral, fungal, or which bacterium it is. If you can go to very detailed, like bacterial is J15, viral is J12, influenza is it's J10 and J11, depending on whether or not there was a test done. So I'll just say J codes, pneumonia, and COVID and all-cause deaths all went up proportionately at the same time. The pattern of increase in 2020 was the same. In 2021, it got cut in half. And then in 2022, it's a little bit less than 21. Okay, so the marginal difference between normal and 2020 was cut in half in 21. So it went down substantially. So J codes respiratory went down. Well, at the same time, okay, we introduced the vaccine in 21, and there's a ramp up period. So it's kind of linear as far as number of people being vaccinated. While more people were vaccinated, you had an increase of I codes, which are circulatory system. It includes the heart and the pulmonary emboli in the lungs. I'm going to set strokes aside for now. The ischemic strokes category went up, but most of the strokes are in G codes in the nervous system. It took me extra months to find that because they're scattered among 13 or 14 different codes. But I'll just say, let's stick to the blood too. So D codes are blood. So you got thrombocytopenia, acute post-hemorrhagic anemia. You have issues with the lymph nodes. And then you have the circulatory system is the blood pathways. So it's still about the blood. The blood is affecting the endothelial cells and the inside lining of the circulatory system. So I code circulatory, D codes blood went up substantially from 20 to 21. Now, don't forget, respiratory went down, cut in half from 20. The marginal difference was cut in half from 20 to 21, while D and I went up. Well, that's an inverse relationship to COVID, but it's a positive, perfect correlation to the vaccine.
Yep.
And I'm not talking individual records. I mean, I went into the individual records, and I have, a whole bunch of cardiac arrhythmia, cardiac arrest, pulmonary embolism, ischemic strokes are all through the roof. So the symptom spectrum profile went up year over year. And then I looked at the age differences. The excess deaths in 2020 the range was roughly 79 to 81 point something, 82 point something in calculation. The average age of COVID death was 81.3. And so it's right in the middle of the excess deaths. You could say, okay, so the COVID/respiratory deaths in 2020 were right in the sweet spot of the excess death ages. Okay, now you go to 21, and I look at the excess deaths there. The age range of excess deaths was 59 to 69, and the average age of COVID deaths was 75.8. It's way the hell outside the average age of excess deaths. Now, I could show you the calculations for this, and you would say, well, it doesn't take into account the dry tinder that's gone from 2020 with all the old people. So the old people, of course, it's going to be younger. And I would say, well, then why isn't there a deficit? Why is there excess?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
So either my calculation is wrong and we killed a lot of younger people with the vaccine, or my calculation is right and people are dying a lot younger from something, probably the vaccine. Either way, it's so the age spectrum profile is the second calculation to the symptom spectrum profile, and then the seasonality profile. When you look at the daily deaths and you do curve smoothing for whatever you want to do, 11-day, 51-day, 3-week, 8-week, the curve smoothing shows these patterns. And as an electrical engineer, I look at curves differently than maybe an epidemiologist. And I just looked at it and like, wow, if COVID's a seasonal respiratory virus, which it is, the peaks would increase. So the amplitude of the signal would increase. The troughs would stay at baseline. So in the summertime, it's going to go to 0, or the baseline of normal deaths. Or if you're talking COVID, it's 0. If you're talking, total deaths, all cause, it goes to baseline, which is normal. And that's seasonal. Now, if you introduce an externality that's not seasonal, but it's linearly increasing, like you're vaccinating more people, it's going to get up to a horizontal asymptote, right? Where everybody's vaccinated, or the number of people who are going to ever be vaccinated are vaccinated. So you have a linear, almost linearly increasing, but then it curves off to a horizontal asymptote, which I would call steady state. Now, when I looked at the, if you add a sine wave to a seasonal respiratory virus, what happens is you have a big high peak amplitude. It still goes to baseline. It still goes to baseline. In the next season, goes up a little bit less and then a little bit less. It's like a first derivative of a Gompertz with seasonality added.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if the troughs start lifting off in a linear fashion, the summer of 21 and then the summer of 22 or even higher, now you've introduced to that society a linearly increasing externality, in addition to the sine wave, the seasonal respiratory virus or seasonal externality. And so what I found is, yeah, that's what happened. There's multiple signals. There's it depends on what you look at. If you look at acute renal failure, why are people having acute renal failure? If it has anything to do with COVID, it would show, right? It would go up with COVID and go down with COVID.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't go up with COVID in 2020. It went up with COVID in 21, but not 20. Well, how does that make any sense? Because people go to the hospital when they're sick with COVID, and the hospital in the United States puts them on remdesivir and kills them with kidney failure, right? Yeah. So, and in addition to that, why would people go to the hospital if they would go if they're really sick? How come there are more people really sick in 21 going to the hospital for COVID, getting on remdesivir than in 20? Well, it wasn't around in 20, but what happens is, I believe that the vaccine, so the more people took the vaccine, the more they were susceptible to bad outcomes in COVID, just the opposite of what the news tells you. They're going to end up in the hospital more likely with the vaccine. So you have the combination of the linearly increasing signal throughout 21 and even worse in 22 with all those booster shots. So they have more likelihood of a bad outcome that they end up in the hospital, that remdesivir kills them by acute renal failure. And that's why acute renal failure all of a sudden has seasonality where it didn't have seasonality before. And it's increasing over time and then levels off in the middle of 22. So that's my long explanation of the three things I found from the beginning and through the past 2 years. And then your other question, it's the tweet.
Your tweet about the wrong to emphasize the myocarditis and spike rather than also looking at the LMP.
So my career was in sales and marketing, and it was rather large contracts. It was software, but it equates to hardware deals in the area of hundreds of millions of dollars. In software, there's no cost of goods sold; it's all profit. So it's about the same kind of executives you're dealing with and everything. Our deals that are 20 million were like $200 million deals for a hardware company. So complex contracts, companies like Raytheon, Honeywell, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. That was a big deal I put together, minus one of those companies, but the others were in it. This is for the guidance control system for the Trident nuclear missile, which is the Polaris missile. It was MK6LE was the project. And so they trained me a lot. They spent over $40,000 over some number of years to train me. And it's like getting an MBA. It's actually better than an MBA. You know, we had CFOs come in, they got paid like 50 grand for a week to come in and train us. And so I learned how to message not only in marketing, but sales and understanding people. So the problem I have with myocarditis, it's absolutely happening. It's a strong signal, especially in those who live. Now, if you look at deaths, if all you talk about is myocarditis, you're only talking about 1% of the overall deaths. And you allow the other side, the pro-vax people or the pro-death people, you allow them to say, well, it's rare. And it is kind of rare. That's true. But the word rare is subjective anyway. And now you're allowing them to make it seem 2 orders of magnitude lower than it really is. So I say there's over 300,000. It's a lot more than that. I'm very conservative with numbers. Over 300,000 people in the United States alone have been killed by this vax, and I can show it. But if you diminish that 2 orders of magnitude, you say, well, it's only 3,000 people across 300 million people. That's not a lot of people. It's like, that's only myocarditis. There's 300,000 people have died from stroke, pulmonary embolism, lymph node cancers and everything else. So I get a little upset with people not being strategic in nature and just talking about the 1%. And very quickly, spike, same thing with spike. The spike is coded from the mRNA that's used for this particular vaccine. Now, I'll just say half to make it easy. I think it's a little more than half. But if half the people are dying because the LNP itself, that is the lipid nanoparticle, the shell that carries the mRNA, that transfects the cell, that says, hey, I'm you. You also have lipids around the outside of every one of your cells, and I'm going to pretend I'm you. Let me in. And that's how it slides into the cell and does its work. If those lipids on the outside of the LNP, which is the delivery mechanism for any mRNA vaccine, if that's a problem in killing more than half the people who are dying, then what the heck are we talking about with RSV and varicella and all the other vaccines they plan on coming out with mRNA? And why did they not study water or saline as a payload, as a control mechanism? I mean, it's fairly obvious that any high school student would know, hey, just throw water in there and see what happens. That's an easy control. Yeah, it sure is. Why didn't they do it? It's purposeful. So those are all my answers.
Okay, just going back to the 2020 excess deaths, the spring there, because if I've understood what you said in other interviews, you're certainly making a case for something that I think we now are sort of converging on, which was the iatrogenesis hypothesis, that it was basically the response to the virus which caused the real peak in excess deaths rather than the virus itself. And in particular, this thing about, I mean, you mentioned there about the increase in, you've got all these bacterial pneumonia deaths, and you've mentioned the fact that they basically weren't, I mean, that bacterial pneumonia isn't that happens to a lot of people after they've got the virus, but they were being denied the normal antibiotics. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, if you go to the NIH website today on how to treat COVID, and the CDC points to it, I think, there's not a mention of the word antibiotic on the entire treatment recommendation page. And what happened is you have the same pattern of, I told you, J codes, COVID, all-cause pneumonia unspecified, and viral pneumonia, all marginal difference cut in half year over year. And then on bacterial pneumonia, it's like, no, it's still up there. That makes absolutely no sense at all, unless and it's 300 excess deaths from bacterial pneumonia. And that's just in Massachusetts in one code, J15. So they're killing people that way. I talked to people. I talked to a medical examiner for 3.5 hours, reviewed hundreds of death certificates, and she related conversations, or he related conversations. I'm not going to say which one, because they'll figure it out. He related conversations about getting calls from the Department of Public Health. And hey, can you put COVID on this death certificate? Hey, can you put COVID on that death certificate? We have a positive test from 2 months ago. Yeah, he was in a car accident. He died from head trauma. Yeah, just throw it on there. Okay, she or he wouldn't do it, but others would. Other medical examiners did do that. In fact, I have hundreds of accidental deaths labeled COVID deaths in Massachusetts. And so they manufactured the fear and panic from this disease. It's barely even an epidemic, let alone a pandemic.
And in particular, as you say, the locations you mentioned, also of course Italy, northern Italy, Lombardy, and also London. There's similar kind of like process. I mean, I guess you know that in the UK they actually changed the NICE guidelines for that period. That they specifically changed the treatment of bacterial pneumonia to not give in those with COVID positive patients to not give the antibiotics. I mean, were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware that they did the same thing in the UK.
Yes, I'm wondering how widespread that was, that it should happen. And, again, it comes into these sort of lockstep.
This was a central plan, and all the Five Eyes nations, went, they all take orders. The prime ministers and the parliament and of New Zealand, Canada, Australia, UK, and then of course the US all followed the same plan. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, that was, of course, I was going to get onto some of that stuff later, but then how do you think, I mean, who is driving it then? There's a suggestion there. There's some kind of, is this really was this really a sort of a global conspiracy then? Is that the way you're thinking?
Absolutely. And we will never know. We're not at that pay grade.
Yeah. Also, again, going back to actually 2020 and 2021, I mean, what's your view on what happened to the flu during that period?
I mean, in the data, it disappeared in 21. It didn't disappear in 20 because there was a significant amount of flu coming up to March. So March is really when the COVID thing started. So if you look at year by year, you still have some flu, but really they just stopped counting flu. I mean, they stopped testing for it. They stopped counting it. I don't know. I'm not a biologist. I would think that, I think it did get pushed out of society a little bit. Like, if there's a real way to count, a real way to test, I think flu probably dropped quite a bit with SARS-CoV-2 coming in, which is a real virus. I do believe there was a real virus. I do believe there's a real disease that has some wacky prothrombotic effects. The data all shows that even in 2020, but you have a really hard time finding it because the signal was so low. If we did nothing, it would have been a bad flu year.
Yeah.
And that's it. We killed millions worldwide, hundreds of thousands in the US. We murdered by government orders.
What your data showed that, something changed, that death pattern from 2020 in 2021 and then going on from that. And the thing that, the obvious thing to point to there is the introduction of the vaccine program. Of course, others have suggested that it's possibly then that the catastrophic effects of the lockdown and the delayed and missed cancer diagnoses, missed heart condition diagnoses and stuff like that. I mean, is that something that you've really thought about?
Yes. So I don't just look at the data from a high level perspective. In engineering, we call it top-down design, bottom-up verification. So you design from the top down, from an abstract, what does the system look like? And then what do the circuit boards look like? And then what do the chips look like? And then what do the gates in the chip, and then the transistors in the chip? You drill down into lower levels of very fine detail. And with data, you can't just look. Roland G. Fryer is an economist. He was second youngest ever tenured at Harvard. I think he's a brilliant guy because he came out with a paper that was opposite to his original hypothesis. And I'll just say the woke people, and they didn't want the results of his paper to come out. Well, they came out and then they attacked him. But his methodology is sound. What he did was, not only did he take surveys and then ask people, it was about the police use of force by race, okay? And he didn't just do the survey, take the data, and then write a paper on it. He interviewed and sampled individual data points, people, and in the sampling found out, why did you answer this question that way or this question that way? And he found that it was not what he expected, but it still supported the data, but not for the reasons he thought it would. And I would say that I don't just look at, did pulmonary embolism go up? I also look at, okay, give me a few people who had it. Let me go look at their obituaries. Let me look at their, get as much information as I can. I went in search of VAERS reports, and I did correlate VAERS reports to death certificates. And I found some very disturbing things where in the VAERS report that I know is from this particular decedent. This is the VAERS report for this death. Then I found a case report written by 6 doctors from Harvard Medical College, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, very esteemed place here in the United States and in Massachusetts. All 6 doctors. The title of the report is Fatal Post-COVID mRNA Vaccine-Associated Cerebral Ischemia. They're telling you in the title, the vaccine killed the person by stroke. And what happened was the death certificate said she died of COVID with no mention of the vaccine. And the VAERS report had very detailed, okay, this is the date she got vaccinated. She reacted within hours. She went to the hospital twice. So now I'm in the data of an individual data point that shows up in this trend that I have in data, and I'm investigating at the lowest level of abstraction. Actually, it's not even the lowest level. The lowest level would be, give me the 2,000 pages of medical reports you have from the hospital. That would be the lowest level. So I'm just above that. And from that data, I determined not only was there fraud of omission by not putting the vaccine on the death certificate, there was fraud of commission by writing COVID on the death certificate as the root cause, the underlying cause, the last one listed in part 1 of the death certificate. And therefore, they committed 2 frauds on that one death certificate. Then I look at the 7-year-old, they did the same thing. I got the VAERS report, matched it. I'm like, okay, they wrote COVID when she really reacted in 5 minutes from the vaccine. A 7-year-old girl, and died. And then they went on TV and told all the parents around here, get your kids vaccinated. This girl died from COVID. No, she died from the vaccine. They lied to everybody. So to prove what you just asked me in the question, you have to go down to lower levels of abstraction and data to verify individual sampling of what you found at a higher level. The higher level data is only supplementary. It's only persuasive evidence. The primary evidence, the absolute best evidence, I don't need an expert to tell me this guy dropped dead before he left the vaccine clinic. He had a car, he got the injection, he was walking to the door, he fell down and died from a heart attack. I don't need a doctor to tell me what did that. That's a real example. That's a real one.
I absolutely agree. And of course, the other side say, well, these things are just coincidental. It's going to happen over a population, and you get all that.
I have 50 coincidences.
The other thing that's interesting, they've also, of course, proposed that the other hypothesis for the data that you're observing, as say from 2021 onwards, is of course that, well, it's long COVID, right? Now, again, I'd be interested to know your experience of this, because we've been desperate. I always, when anybody puts that hypothesis, I say, I want to see the data. Give me the data on these long COVID sufferers by vaccination status. They never produce that data. Have you ever seen any of that?
No, but that's why you have to go to the lower levels of abstraction, which they're trying to keep from us, right?
Exactly.
Because that's why you really need to go to lower levels of abstraction. They're trying to keep that from us. Now, I'll just say that what I found in the individual records is irrefutable, and the long COVID argument disappears. It's like, no, this person died from a stroke reacting after hours. This person 2 weeks earlier. Okay, Brianna was 30. She was an English teacher. Now I'm going to start getting upset again. You know, they're hiding it. They're killing people. She's a high school teacher. And 2 weeks before her, Diane was 62. She got the shot, had a headache, and died from a stroke. And she died from a intracranial hemorrhage in the setting of thrombocytopenia known to be caused by the vaccine. And then, so they didn't investigate her. They didn't alert anybody. They hid it. So Brianna dies at 30, injected 2 weeks after Diane died, and kept alive on a system for another couple of weeks. So it's really about 4 weeks between the deaths. And then 5 weeks and 20 miles away, a 17-year-old girl, Eden, gets injected. And, you know, it blows me away that a doctor would treat her patient for a severe headache twice in a week. And when the headache resolves, give her second dose to protect her from COVID.
Yeah.
And then she dies from a hemorrhage, intracranial. It's a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. It's another type of hemorrhagic stroke. And then you get the brief report from the doctors, 6 pages long, saying, this isn't a CVST type of stroke, talking about Brianna, who had an ischemic stroke. This isn't a CVST, which we've found a number of reports from several COVID vaccines, not just the Johnson & Johnson. That was a limited hangout. You know, they were trying to make you think, oh, it's just the Johnson & Johnson. Keep taking the Moderna. And everybody around me is saying, well, which one did you get? Did you get the Moderna? Did you get the... Well, who cares? What difference does it make? They're all killing everybody, but they don't think. So even in the paper, they're saying several reports, a number of case reports where thrombocytopenia is frequent. They even use the word frequent. So they killed 3 women in 3 months in one state in March, April, and early June of 2021. 2021. That's more than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
More than 2 years ago. And that's like hours later had a stroke, hours later had a stroke, hours later had a stroke. You can take your long COVID and do you know what with it.
Yeah.
Because there's just forget about it. That's an excuse that people who stay in higher levels of abstraction of data, you can't, you'll argue that forever unless you go down into the
I know, but this whole thing, I know that you're very forthright about the need to discuss the personal stories. I know that I think the first part of your book is going to be really discussing the personal stories, and I get that. But the thing here's a problem, right? Because I knew that there was a problem with the vaccines from the start, but mainly because of the clever people who were surrounding me and who I trusted, the clinicians, you know. But I happen to know one of the first people. In the UK, at the end of December, beginning of January, they started the rollout of 2021. They started the rollout of the most sort of elderly and the most at risk, as they called them. And a friend of mine's father, who was elderly but perfectly healthy, it was an old man, took the vaccine, died within 24 hours. Okay, and what happened? The family were in complete denial that you could not even mention. They absolutely rejected the notion this could possibly have any relation to the vaccine. It was just, it was his time. It was just, that was purely coincidence. And this, so that was an early example of why it occurred to me that people were going to be in denial about it. They were never going to get reported. It was never going to get reported, probably not even on his death certificate that he was vaccinated, because it happened so quickly afterwards. The data wouldn't have been there, whatever, they wouldn't have matched it, right? And this was going to be a recurring problem. And it was, because since then, personally, I know of people who seem to have had the turbo cancer thing, shortly after getting the booster. And the family, again, absolutely, if you even raise this issue that maybe if you say anything about the possibility that this is in any way vaccine related, they get very angry. So here are people dying, and here we know that the family will never talk about it, and it will never ever be considered that the vaccine had any role. I mean, hence you get this situation why it's so difficult to get families speaking about deaths of loved ones as a result of the vaccine. That's something I think you've also encountered, isn't it?
Yeah, but here's where I differ from you. I mean, we might be around the same age, and you've heard this term before. Never say never. Okay, I don't use absolutes. You say the family are never going to It's not never. Well, as public opinion shifts, and it will, and it was February 21. That's 2 months into the vaccine when I first looked at VAERS, and I found thousands of deaths already. I mean, I have printouts of it. There's a meme I put out in probably June, July, and there's a video I did on YouTube. I did that video in April of 2021. It's an economics torts video for torts class I was in for law school. And in that video at the end, there's references to VAERS and the deaths. So even that early on, the signal was absolutely clear. But what I said was, and there's a few presentations, Children's Health Defense locally did one, and they titled it, from what I said, "This won't end till everybody knows somebody." And that means till everybody knows somebody who's dead or maimed from this vaccine. And public opinion will shift. And what you're saying is, even if they know somebody, they won't admit it, but they will. It'll take time. It'll take time, but they will eventually.
But there's I mean, it's not just the cognitive dissonance. Remember that in a lot of these cases, those people, one of the reasons why they've got the cognitive dissonance about it and why they won't talk about it is because they almost certainly encourage that person to get the vaccine. So there's that aspect of it. But then but the problem is, again, you say until everyone knows, but the problem is that the media have such total control over the narrative that in the incredibly rare cases where they will even talk about it, they'll talk about how, unbelievably rare it is. I mean, I'll give you another example. In the UK, I mean, I interviewed some of the well-known vaccine ninjas, a guy called, I don't know if you've come across Alex Mitchell, who had to have his leg amputated. And he tells a story that he was, when the Scottish press spoke to him about this, and he was talking about it when they put the story out, they had to put this idea out that it was so incredibly rare. They were prepared to publish his story, but say that it was incredibly rare. But in addition, incredibly, they actually quoted him as saying that, he would still recommend people to get the vaccine. And he never said that. And yet the media were able to get away with a blatant lie like that. And this is how they kind of like spin the narrative. I mean, how do we get around that total control of the media?
That's exactly why I said what I said in early 21. This won't end till everybody knows somebody, because the media propaganda is so strong. You can't break people from that. There are people who look at the media and the government as their God. It's the pandemic is not viral. It's moral. My second book subtitle is "The Pandemic is Moral, Not Viral." And the reason I say that is it's all lies. The doctors are lying. Either lying by omission or just outright lying. And you have the media lying, and everybody's lying to everybody, just hoping that, they've got it right when they've got it wrong.
But are people gonna wake up? So if a person's, their loved one dies of a turbo cancer, let's say a few months after the booster, they're not going to put two and two together, because they've not been, the media is not allowing them to think in that way.
At our side, if you take sections of society and try to break them into buckets of personality traits, most of us were contrarians at the very beginning, right? And then we've gotten some other kind of people who are less contrarian, but still questioning and untrusting. And the same type of personality trait are those who are more independent in thought. I'm not going to believe anybody. Yeah. I'm going to do my own homework. And because we're all independent, we don't work lockstep as a group. We're not all mindless drones, just by our very nature. And we're a smaller section of society because man is a herd animal. And because of the sociological, I delve into various purviews, but in the sociological aspect of it, we were never going to be the drivers of public opinion and thought. It takes time. That we're going to have to seed, keep doing your work. Keep spreading the word. Keep going. Don't give up. Every day I wake up and I'm like, screw these people. They're all a bunch of dummies. I'm going to go live a happy life and not be vaccinated. They can all go jump in a lake. No, that's not right either. I got to try to save the people who were lied to by the government. And it's just the nature of their personality that they're trusting of government. If they had a stronger foundation, maybe in Christianity or Judaism or Shintoism, they would trust in something more than government. But because the breakdown of the moral fabric of society was something people want to be moral. They have a desire to be moral. Most people aren't sociopaths, right? And in that desire to be moral, if they don't have a true moral foundation, like a good, religion, then it leaves an opening for government to step in and say, no, you want to save people. We have to save Granny. We have to save Grandma. We have to you're a good and right and moral person. There are all these people committing suicide because they're trans and society is pressuring against them. And now we have to all support trans. All these Black people are being killed by police, even though they're not. The data doesn't show that, but they lie to everybody and they believe all the lies, and it allows for them. I'm moral, so I'm going to join BLM or LGBT, or I'm going to join pro-vaxxers. I'm the good person. I'm going to do what government says, because that's replaced my moral foundation. And all I have to do is listen to them, and I'm a good person. And they don't have to think for themselves to be a good person. They just have to do what they're told. That's where we are.
Yeah. So it's a long road. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
In 15 years' time, we might have actually convinced more than 50% of what really went on these last 3 years.
It won't be that long. It won't be that long. Unfortunately, lymph node cancer specifically is 300% of normal as of Q1 2023. Last year, it was 258% of normal in the entire year, and it's still going up. So the short-term effects are the blood and the circulatory system related deaths, pulmonary emboly, stuff like that happens in the short term. But now we're starting to look at the long term. It's not over, and people are going to find out. Norman, I hope it's okay if I call you Norman.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. I'm a first name kind of guy. It's going to come around. Public opinion will come around. These people who have seen their relatives die and are in denial now, that denial is only going to last so long, because I'm proving it. Other people are proving it.
Yeah.
I got some big stuff coming.
Well, on to going on then, but the question I was going to ask about the data and this whole thing, the holy grail of the accurate linkage between the mortality data and the vaccination status data. I mean, I can tell you, the UK, this is of course something that we've really been focusing on, because we thought that the UK's Office for National Statistics was supposed to be the sort of the world leading credible organisation for producing accurate data analysis, and they were one of the only national organizations producing mortality data by vaccination status. But we saw straight away early on that their data was massively flawed, massively biased. There was this unbelievable miscategorization problem, all of that. What we're seeing now is that they're still using that, incidentally, against the statistics regulators' advice. They're still pumping that out as evidence. They're saying, look, there's evidence that actually all-cause mortality is lower in the vaccinated than the unvaccinated, whereas actually, even if you take even the smallest, do even the minor adjustments for the known biases that are in there, and we've listed many of them, it's the other way. But we're up against, you're saying that your analysis is more accurate than the Office of National Statistics. We've got all that against us. So where are you on, where are you in terms of getting that type of accurate data to get to the holy grail of matching? Because we know, and I know that if we got that, where we do get the accurate data, we know that the all-cause mortality in the vaccinated is higher than the unvaccinated, right? But we're just not getting sufficiently accurate data over a large enough population for all of the relevant age groups.
Yeah, so it's been more than a year since I proposed some legislation, but I also proposed a pro bono audit of public health data. It was about a year ago that first did the Florida one. Let me back up here. The simple answer is every state in the United States has an immunization information system, IIS. Okay. They call it different things. They have different acronyms, like the California Immunization Registry, CAIR. Indiana has the alert system. Massachusetts is very original in the Massachusetts Immunization Information System. And New Hampshire has the New Hampshire Immunization Information System. Very simply, they have a record of who got vaccinated, when they got vaccinated, what type of vaccine they got for each person. That's in a database.
But can I just on that, before you go on, there's an issue is because we in the UK, we've got a similar system, and we know how flawed that is, because we know that, for example, people who were definitely not vaccinated are recorded with specific dates and locations as vaccinated in that system. And we've also know some reasons why that might be. And then you've also got the situation, because of all these pop-up clinics that happened, these temporary things, they were never properly recording the vaccinations which did take place into those systems. So you've got those two types of errors happening. So we have no confidence at all in the UK national immunization system. So why would you be confident that these different US ones are any better?
For the same reason I said before. You're talking about data and statistics at an aggregated level. If I get the database, I can go to the individual person. This guy got vaccinated on this date, and all I got to do is ask his relatives if it's true.
Right.
I got his death certificate. Right. I got, onset of symptoms. There's various reports. Once you start correlating the individual records, I mean, first I would do a bin sort and look for people who dropped dead within 1 day of vaccination, and then 3 days, 1 week, 3 weeks, 10 weeks, 25 weeks, and 1 year. So I bin sort them into those, and just within the 3 days or the 1 week, I'll find thousands of people who died from the vaccine within a week in Florida. I mean, they got 21 million people. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, I'll find thousands in Massachusetts within, say, a week or two. Once you start getting the high-level data, you can then drill down. If you get what I call record-level source data, I use it throughout my book. You might call it primary source data or primary data. But if you get the original record level source, each record, give me the source. Don't give me de-identified whatever and removed columns and aggregated bundles of renal failure when you're mixing up chronic and acute, where there's a huge difference. So my lawsuit is asking for the vaccine records of a few specific people, one being the 7-year-old girl who died. And just give me the vaccine record. And then if it's what I say it is, and it matches the VAERS report, and it matches the death certificate, then all you people committed federal felony fraud. The state, the medical examiner, the chief medical examiner, the public health commissioner, the governor of the state, all committed fraud on public records, which these are federal felonies. They're 5 years to 20 years in prison kind of things. These are not light crimes. And they're doing it as a matter of custom and practice throughout the entire enterprise. I use the word enterprise for a reason. It has to go with RICO, Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations, which is a set of federal laws in the United States. This whole thing is a massive crime syndicate, including the government and pharma. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the trouble is the legal system's also part of that corrupt system.
I know.
That's the problem. That's the problem you've got.
I'm trying to work all the problems. We have, you guys dropped the grand jury systems. You invented it, right? The grand jury, but you got rid of it. And so did all the other Five Eyes except the United States. We still have grand juries. We not only have a federal grand jury, we have state grand juries. We have county grand juries in some states. And what a grand jury is, for your audience, it's usually 23 citizens sitting on a panel. Now, that jury does not report to the judicial branch. It does not report to the legislative branch. It does not report to the executive branch. It's an independent body of citizens which has subpoena power. So a county in Oklahoma that has a grand jury could say, subpoena Fauci, drag his ass. I don't know about your language on your show.
It's okay.
Drag his butt down to Oklahoma and make him testify before we 23 citizens in Oklahoma. He has to answer some questions. And the problem is the executive branches in these areas believe that they own the grand jury, even though they don't constitutionally. So we're in a fight. We're in a fight to try to wrestle, to wrest the WREST, the grand jury system, back to the people. Because right now the gatekeepers are in. So at the federal level, grand juries would be the Department of Justice. That would be Joe Biden's administration. They'll ever, allow this to happen. So we're trying to get around that to a judge to say, no, you don't own it. We want to get an independent counsel appointed instead of a federal prosecutor. And once we get somebody independent in there, we want the grand jury to know that they can put out a report even if the DOJ is not going to prosecute, we put out a report saying, yeah, we have all this evidence and this did happen. And that goes out to the public. So I'm trying, we have a whole bunch of people trying different things.
Well, that's great. I mean, I really wish you best of luck there. I mean, on that topic, who are the sort of people I mean, there seems to be a lot of groups of dissidents and within this who are challenging this sort of this whole COVID narrative. We seem to be in, we sort of meet up occasionally as we did before in that Zoom meeting, but there seems to be lots of sort of disparate groups doing kind of like overlapping work, which is not maybe a very efficient way of doing things. So the question is, who are the kind of like people you sort of hang around with and really trust? And B, is there any way that we can maybe make the whole, of this dissident movement, the anti-COVID, official COVID narrative movement more efficient?
Okay, so I'll just run through a few groups. Dr. Henry Ely is one of 3 plaintiffs, along with Senator Dennis Linthicum and Senator Kim Thatcher out in Oregon. Dr. Ely since moved from Oregon, but it's filed in the District of Oregon. It's a petition for grand jury investigation of the CDC and FDA. I participate in that group weekly for probably a year and a half now. I was in a group with Steve Kirsch, who had, we had Jessica Rose, Kevin McKernan, Jonathan Cooey was in there a little bit, Stephanie Seneff, Mark Girardeau, a whole bunch of people. We talked for 2 hours on a call once a week for most of us for a year, Kevin and JJ maybe for 6 months, just in bantering amongst each other in terms of the science news and the data that we were coming. Oh, and Matthew Crawford was in there too. And I'm forgetting more people. I feel bad. Byron Bridle, Ira Bernstein. So anyway, in those discussions in 2 hours, I just made a post on this. We were a year ahead of all the research papers. Just the stuff that we were discussing, and I didn't understand a lot of the biology, but I remembered the conversations. And it's like, well, this could be happening if that's happening. And then I would come and say, well, I can show that lymph node cancer is way up. Oh, well, there's probably the probable reason for that is XYZ. And all these, we weren't right about everything. Not every suggestion somebody made on a call came true. But for the most part, we nailed it as a group with all the individual contributions a year ahead of all the research papers. There are things coming out now that we were talking about 16 months ago. So that's another group. Then PANDA, Pandemic Data Analytics, Nick Hudson. Your followers probably know him.
Well, we know all of those. I mean, most of those. I mean, I'm on groups with a lot of the people that we just not on one with you, but
I know
a lot of the people that you already mentioned there. So
what else? So I'm pretty independent. I do, participate in discussions, but I do my own thing. But what I've explained to the medical doctors for COVID ethics, I jumped on that maybe 10 months ago. I saw that they were having Carlo Vigano on, which is a hero of mine. Carlo Maria Vigano. He's the real Catholic leader to me. Not Bergoglio, the guy who's pretending to be Pope. Sorry for all your Roman Catholic listeners. That's how I feel. But anyway, back to, I said, people say we have to unite. It's like, no, that's never going to work because there are too many egos on our side. All the scientists and all the doctors, everybody's got an ego. There's a very big difference between uniting and allying. An alliance is very different from a united, people kind of confuse them, but to unite would be to come up with a common hierarchical structure within the organizations. No, we need to take the bigger organizations and have them meet maybe monthly to discuss and have an agenda, run the meeting really tightly. And that way you would increase your economic efficiency of utility of the organization. So you just said there's a lot of redundancy and waste. You're absolutely right. Not only that, but people are stepping on each other. Now it's just, but organizational behavior, I'm probably going off on tangents, but when organizations form like nonprofits, they form like regular companies too. They have an informal and a formal political structure. And in the behaviors, some people want raises and promotions because these are full-time employees, many of them. And they jockey for positions. So you get in a new organization, you get infighting. Children's Health Defense has been around a long time. They have every organization has problems, but they don't necessarily have the problem that the newer organizations have, where people are jockeying for power positions within the organization. And then what you have is they're all within the market, they're competing for revenue, which is donations for them. And in competing for that revenue, you get the people who are driving the revenue, I don't know if you call them salespeople or people who get money. They start shooting at each other behind the scenes. The organizations start bad-mouthing each other. And it's
not just behind the scenes. I mean, we know there's some real splits.
Oh, yeah.
Chasms, legally.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Going on at the moment.
Yeah. So that's just the nature of man. That I saw that coming a long time ago before it even happened. And that's why I don't like joining organizations, because I want to be effective and maximize my own utility. But if you can get these people into an alliance and at least say, okay, we have the same overall mission. What are the objectives that you want to reach for to meet the mission? Okay. And then within each objective, what are the strategies to achieve that objective? And then within the strategies, what are the tactics or what are the actions that we do that align with the strategy that further get toward the objective that achieves the mission?
But on that point, of course, there are some who will say that, do these people who seem to have the same objective, do they really have them? I mean, there are people who say there are certain prominent people there who are actually genuinely sort of controlled opposition, therefore might appear to have the same objective, but have exactly the opposite to what we believe they have. I mean, is that something that you buy into?
Yeah, I think I think controlled opposition is overused. There are some who are controlled opposition, but many times they're just chaos agents, which should be used more, especially when you get into the mutton crew and all that stuff. They're just chaos agents. But when you get into these organizations and you have these alliance meetings, things shake out pretty quickly. If you commit to doing certain things and not stepping on somebody else's initiative, and imagine if, say, I don't even want to pick one. It's organization A. Imagine if they wanted to do something and B, C, D, and E said, we're going to send our people to your thing and we're going to blow it up. So instead of having, 5,000, we're going to have 100,000 people there. Wow. Imagine if we maximized our utility across the alliance to support each other, where there's no competition for revenue, donations, but there is a promotion of the overall mission at the highest level. And it's all it is saying, hey, all our people, all our listeners, all our donators, all the people out there in the world who listen to us, go to this guy's thing in this city at this time. And all of a sudden you've got 10x the public opinion happening.
Absolutely. People, I think that you've really hit the nail on the head there, because I think that needs to be done more and hasn't. There is that lack of promoting, each other's work and ideas because of the egotistical thing, and I think that's a real problem. Okay, my final, because we'll have to stop soon. My final question is actually about, again, going back to the mainstream media again and the control. Have the mainstream media ever sort of contacted you? Have they ever done a hit job on you? I mean, what's your relationship with the mainstream media?
Nothing. I'm very low lying. I mean, if anybody would contact me, it might be somebody from Fox. I mean, I'm not big enough. Norman, nobody. You guys know me. Everybody in the movement seems to know me and my work, but nobody outside does. Nobody outside does.
This is something that we're seeing all the time. I
have plans. I have plans. When my book comes out, I have plans.
Good, because even some of the most prominent people, I won't mention names, it turns out, that even within their own villages, people don't, the normies have no idea who they are.
They're in a media bubble. They go and they make the same speeches to the same people all the time. When I tell people where I'm going, and I have told a few people where I plan to go with the message once the book is done, they're like, who are they? I don't know who they are. Who are they? They're like, I'll tell you who they are. They're the biggest podcasters in the world. They have 10 times the reach of CNN or MSNBC. When I go on one of those that I'm talking about, 10 times the number of people will know about it than watch CNN.
Right.
These are the people driving our society now, and people our age, we don't even know it.
Right. Well, hopefully you'll get onto, because maybe you'll get onto Joe Rogan or something like that soon.
No, that would be the biggest. That's the biggest. Tucker Carlson might be the second biggest, but
Tucker... I said it was the last question because there was something funny about that Dr. Drew interview you did. And I noticed that he said in that he was still recommending the vaccination to his elderly patients. Did you understand that?
Yeah, somebody asked me about that Friday on a podcast, and I got to give him credit for not only did he bring me up on stage in December, and then again, knowing who I was and knowing what I was going to say, so he doesn't mind the truth coming out. I think he wants it, so I got to give him credit for that. But then his producer reached out; they wanted to have me on for half an hour, and then she watched the video of mine and she said, "Can you do an hour?" And I said, "Yes, sure." We ended up talking for 90 minutes. Yep. And in the end, he did have to say that about still recommending it for older people. And I got to believe that he really believes what he's doing. Yeah. I can't find any wedge in there for any type of dishonesty or being owned by pharma, or, I give him credit for sticking to what he thinks. It would take several hours for me to go through the data and with a fine-tooth comb and explain to him where I believe he's wrong about the older people. Yeah. And it's hidden. So it's frustrating to a lot of people to hear him say that at the end of hearing everything he did from me. Yeah. But he did hear everything from me, and he put me on a national stage. So, credit to him. He did try to say that Johnson & Johnson caused the CVST and the
I saw that.
Well. And I said, it's all of them. Yeah. In fact, Brianna had the Moderna. She didn't have the J&J. None of those people had the J&J. It's all. Look,
thanks. It's been fantastic talking to you. Stay with me just after I stop the recording, but it's been fantastic speaking with you, and thanks for giving so much of your time today. And I really hope that, and maybe I can have in some small way push you to a bigger, newer audience. But yeah, let's hope for much bigger attention to what you're alerting people to.